Now, to differentiate between non-material culture and material culture, I thought, well, let's just come back to the same example, where earlier we looked at the material culture in terms of the types of cars found in each of the regions. Now let's look at more deeper. Why are those the cars that are preferred in each of those regions? Because this reflects the shared viewpoints of this particular region, which we could think of them as cultural regions, or the values, the invisible things, the things you can't touch. So we think about the Pacific. What's going on up there? First off, no domestic brands, no American brands. Those are all foreign brands. Further, they're going to be more eco-friendly. This is the only one where there's actually a hybrid shown on the list. And so here, more environmentally friendly. Also add a little bit of wealth there with the Audi, the BMW, the Lexus, and all of that. And so we get the environmentally conscious, wealthy West Coaster out there in the Pacific. Down at the bottom, we see similarities between the Southwest and Southeast and the Great Plains and Midwest, which also often reflect itself out in the elections. These are areas that kind of vote similar. And so what we got here is a lot more pride for USA, a lot more domestic brands being purchased. Further, we got a lot more rurality in these areas, and so subsequently pickup trucks dominate both of these two regions. Up at the top right-hand corner, we think about the northeast part of the United States that includes New England and Mid-Atlantic. Very rugged terrain. Also a lot of crappy weather, lots of blizzards that come through, nor'easters, rain events, but also a lot of wealth up there. So we can see that reflected in the car preference. So the Jeep Grand Cherokee and the Honda CR-V to get up over the rugged areas, but also the Mercedes E-Class sedan, the most expensive probably car on all of these lists here. So what this does is accentuate a little bit deeper. We got the material culture, the actual cars themselves, but then we have the values, the intangible stuff is kind of the car preference, why they would want to purchase these types of vehicles. So values, once again, things you can't touch. So we think about, once again, musical instruments. So we think about a bluegrass band. The musical instruments, the actual fiddle, all of that, they make sweet music with, is part of the material culture. But the idea that you have to have those 5 elements, banjo, fiddle, upright bass, rhythm guitar, and mandolin, the idea that you have to have that is values. It's intangible. So we think about a shared viewpoint amongst the group. Superstitions, another example. So in the United States, when you get married, the bride wears a white gown, whereas in India, they wear a red gown, the bride. And so we can see superstitions. The preference for what color the bride wears on her wedding day. Other examples, we think about rural values. So this is something that always comes up around election time. Rural values. And so what are rural values? When I ask this question in an audience, usually people say, patriotism, very strong role of family, the role of community. It's a very tight-knit community in rural areas. You know your neighbor. You know your neighbor very, very well. Also, conservative values, and so you're not going to go overspend on items. And so these are all part of rural values. Not saying that in urban areas there's not an emphasis on these same things, but in rural areas you definitely see family. Religion often plays a key role. Community and all of those play a huge role in defining these cultural groups. And this often relates to religion. So beliefs, very much reflect this. And so certain religions have their values. And so you best go to church, as I saw in this sign in Kentucky, or the devil will get you. So this is once again, is a way to showcase the values of a particular area. This would be what they call the Bible Belt, where there's a strong presence of the Christian church in this particular area, and people are very, very devout about it. This is here from northern Alabama, and so once again, this is very much also in the Bible Belt. And so, what are the values here? So obviously, faith, being able to protect yourself, so individual freedom, and then guts, being patriotic, supporting your military, supporting our troops overseas is very much a part of these rural values, but also in this particular area, what we call the Bible Belt, evident in all kinds of various material culture that you can see. For example, along the roads. Values are also reflected in the preferences for soft drinks. And so we can see this play out at the global level. So Coke is more popular globally, but we do see regional differences. We do see country differences. For example, Coke is more popular in Russia and Latin America. Why Russia? Well, during the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union and the United States were very much at odds with each other. It's the whole Cold War. And so the Soviet Union, what they did was they had contracts with Pepsi to be essentially the supplier of soft drinks instead of Coke, because they want nothing that says, nothing that supports America. Even though Pepsi's from America, Coke is very much seen as a symbol of America. And so what happened was when the Soviet Union fell, a lot of the Russians were happy about that. And when it fell, when it essentially fizzled away, a lot of the Russians who took over said, by gosh, we were going to boycott that era. We want to shed that history. And so because of that, we want to drink Coke now. So let the Coke come our way. And so that's why they prefer Coke today in Russia. In Latin America, a lot of the raw materials, but also the production and manufacturing of Coca-Cola, comes from Latin American countries. And so a lot of individuals work for Coca-Cola. A lot of them have family members who work somewhere in the supply chain that gets that Coke from liquid to actual beverage that goes into your belly or your mouth, whatever. So Coke is more popular because there's a little bit more pride. Because, hey, it's a company that supports us. This is a company that provides jobs and opportunity for us. Pepsi is more popular in the Middle East and Canada. Why in the Middle East is because, once again, Coke's seen as a symbol of America, and there's still some tension between the Middle East and the United States today. Further, Coke has historically had a larger presence in Israel, and Israel versus the Middle East is another story that we'll tell another time. But Canada, why they like Pepsi is, I would argue, because of marketing. Pepsi has been very, very good at marketing their brand throughout Canada, especially in Quebec, that French-speaking province of Canada. So you'll see Pepsi all over everything, including the arena. So they have their hockey arena is called the Colisée Pepsi. So that's essentially the Pepsi Coliseum, which we used to have one here in Indianapolis. And just to finish up on values, let's just look at sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Let's focusing on the drugs. So alcohol consumption, we've seen this before. So this is also kind of reflects values. It does reflect an income level for sure, but the idea that you're going to consume a lot is definitely part of the values of European and definitely there in Russia. Where in the Middle East, you see the role of religion influencing their values, influencing the fact that you do not see lots of people drinking. In fact, when you go to the Middle East, it's hard to find a beer. It's hard just to grab a drink. Typically, it's at airports is your best chance. So here we can see values reflected regarding alcohol at the global level. Here's a map that shows different regions of the United States based on alcohol consumption. And so the blue area, the north central area, and the New England area, the teal area, those are the two wettest areas in the country. Those are the two places where people drink the most. Then you have the kind of the moderate drinkers, and those are the pink areas on the Pacific coast, and the red areas there in the Mid-Atlantic region. In those areas, there's a little bit of drinking, but they're more likely to drink wine. So wine is not something that you're just going to get hammered drinking 2 bottles of wine. Wine is going to be something you might have a couple glasses a night, nothing more. The driest areas are the brown areas or the tan areas and the gray areas. In fact, the tan areas, which Indiana is, are the places in which drinking is the least occurring, and so people don't drink that much, and so they're the dry areas. Also, these are a lot of these places, not so much in Indiana. We've got that weird rule which you can't buy alcohol on Sundays, but in much of these tan areas actually have counties in which they're completely dry, in which you cannot buy alcohol in those particular counties. And so also in those gray counties, or those gray states, Louisiana, although, you think of Mardi Gras, but outside of New Orleans, not much alcohol consumption. A lot of this is reflected in religion. So this is, once again, these areas, especially the tan, very, very high, Christian faith, the Bible Belt, but also there, the Mormon faith in Utah. So we can see how, once again, cultural differences in terms of values, how much we're going to get hammered tonight, varies from place to place. And to build off this once more, the north central area where we find, essentially these 7 states are the states that have the highest number of bars per population. So this is essentially the places where they like to drink. And they like to drink everything. A little bit of wine, a little bit of beer, a little bit of hard stuff, where you do see regional differences in other places. Like I mentioned beforehand, the West Coast, much more wine drinkers. Whereas in this part of the area of the country, they drink everything. And they do it a lot, and they do a lot of it. So the red states, the Maroon States, are places that are most likely to have binge drinkers over the age of 12. So these are places that you see heavy amounts of drinking. So drinking to get drunk. rather than drinking to have just a buzz and a good time. Further evidence of values we see in the Great Lakes states and the New England states, a particular pattern in which they're not colored on this particular map. What this map is showing is red states, or states that in some way or form support the death penalty, support executions. And so in the Great Lakes, New England areas, it's part of their values. Everyone should live. There should be no death penalty. And so the idea that eye for an eye is not a punishment in those particular areas, and that's reflected in their particular values. Here's a map that's constantly being adjusted, and so it might not be updated. But these are all states that in some way or fashion are banning same-sex marriage. And so these are states in which you cannot marry someone of the same sex. Whereas, the white states are all areas in which you can marry the person of the same sex. And so these red places, and this also reflects, a lot of the religion, once again. So the Bible Belt, we see that once again play itself out. Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas. This is where Christian values are very, very, very strong, and so people believe that people should not of the same sex be married. But these states in the red are ones in which you can marry your first cousin. So is this interesting? This is kind of something that kind of maybe creeps you out. But in some states, you can legally marry your cousin. In some, there's other states that have certain rules if one is infertile, or if you're both over the age of 50 or whatever. But these are all states in which you can marry your own cousin. Now moving on to cannabis use. So you see cannabis use, or marijuana, most widely used there in North America, particularly Canada, United States, but also Iceland and Greenland. Although they're not really colored up there, they should be. Other places you see definitely in Western Europe more cannabis use, but Asia, there is minimal marijuana use, minimal cannabis. Maybe a little bit in Japan here and there, but you do not find it in large numbers in China, for example. But definitely in North America, you see it's very much part of the values as far as people who are cool with marijuana. And here's the geography of marijuana laws. So the green-colored states are all states, go figure green, are all states that either have legal marijuana, which you can buy it recreationally, like, for example, Colorado and the Washington State, or it's decriminalized. Essentially, it's a small fine or you don't get arrested, or where there's medical marijuana. So all of these green states, and once again, it's another map that's constantly changing. That this reflects people's values, people's view of marijuana. And as far as the usage of marijuana, you're more likely to be found on both of the northern coasts. So the northern and western coast there in the Pacific Northwest. Interesting, Utah and Idaho. I would argue that's the role of the Mormon faith, which is very prevalent in both of those states. But all those areas, pretty much in the west coast, you see high marijuana usage. Other places would be over there in New England. So essentially, it's kind of, I don't know if there's scientific studies behind it, but places that are higher, elevation-wise, also have more rates of marijuana usage. So maybe there's something about being able to look off in the horizon from the top of a mountain and marijuana. I don't know, but there's definitely some evidence here.